Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you here today for the release of the first 6 months progress report on the U.S.-Japan Auto and Auto Parts Agreement. First of all, let me recognize some people who are with us today. Of course, first the Vice President of the United States, Al Gore, my fellow Tennessean. We wanted a Saturn out there, I guess, didn't we? Soon. Laura Tyson, the head of the National Economic Council, of course, my wonderful and old friend from California, Leon Panetta, our Chief of Staff. Acting Secretary of Commerce, Mary Good, Mary right here. Thank you for so much you've been doing under such difficult circumstances over the last number of days. We're all deeply, deeply in debt to you. My old friend, of course, Stu Eisenstadt, who's just become Undersecretary of Commerce, and we've worked so closely together over the years. We're delighted you're back home, Stu, and you delight us with your presence and with the service you're going to give. We have the dynamic duo from Michigan here, Senator Carl Levin and Congressman Sandy Levin, who worked, Mr. President, we would not have an agreement without their great work going to Geneva and making sure the Japanese government and their new prime minister understood exactly what we were talking about, and we appreciate everything they have done. Also, Ambassador Jim Blanchard, I think, is here today, and I'd like to recognize him. We have a number of leaders from the auto industry, many of whom build these new right-hand drive models, 17 of them. The cars the President, many of the representatives of which we just saw outside, which are unbelievably impressive. And I'd like to recognize them before you applaud for them. On the dais is Jim Hill out of Atlanta, Georgia. Jim, thank you for being here. He's the plant manager at Ford's Atlanta assembly plant. Pete Bostello of Ford, and Executive Vice President of that company. Joining them is Mr. J.C. Phillips, Chairman of Atlanta's Local 882 of the United Auto Workers. Delighted you're here, of course. John Felice, Plant Manager at Chrysler's Belvedere, Illinois plant, and also Rob Libertor, our old friend, is a Vice President of Chrysler. Thank you, Rob, for being here as well. From General Motors, we have Richard LaFave, Vice President in charge of all GM small cars. Dave Pallas, Plant Manager from GM's Lordstown, Ohio plant. And representing the important auto parts industry, we have Jack Thompson, President of Monroe Auto Equipment, our friend Bob Cole of Kaiser Lumen. How about a hand for all of them? Also like to acknowledge Ambassador Ira Shapiro, who has worked with me since the day I arrived at USTR and who deserves a lion's share of credit for what we're celebrating here today. It's obviously a pleasure to see you all here to discuss the progress that we've made and the challenges which still lie before us in opening Japan's markets, in particular the auto market, to U.S. goods and for U.S. services. President Clinton's highest priority has always been to stand up for the interests of American workers. As a candidate in 1991, he called for a new trade policy that says to Europe, Japan, and all of our trading partners, we favor an open trading system, but if you won't play by those rules, we'll play by yours. The President has consistently and diligently pursued a trade policy based on the notion of a level playing field with all our trading partners, including Japan. President Clinton's policy has been clear, consistent, and constant. When President Clinton took office, he knew that one-way trade with Japan was no longer acceptable. Two great powers like Japan and the United States should trade on fair and equal terms. The President's new approach took root in July of 1993 when he traveled to Japan and completed the framework agreement in July 1993, a new comprehensive approach to our trade relationship with Japan. It changed the way we operate as trading partners. In 3 years, the Clinton administration has reached 21 today results-oriented agreements with Japan, and the President, my friend, and the one we miss so much, Ron Brown, diligently worked with me and worked with the President to enforce those agreements. The President's efforts are working. 8 presidents have tried to change our trade relationship with Japan. President Clinton is the first to produce real, concrete, solid results. U.S. exports to Japan were up 35% in the last 3 years. U.S. exports to Japan are growing at a rate 5 times faster than imports from Japan, and that went to 7 times faster in January 1996. A study by the Council of Economic Advisors showed that in those sectors covered by trade agreements with Japan, exports have grown by an astonishing 85% since 1993. This auto agreement, as today's report shows, is but one example of the President's success. The President always knew that the naysayers and pessimists who said that Americans can't compete in Japan were wrong. President Clinton knew there was much we had to do to get our own house in order, but a key problem was that Japan's markets were closed. He knew that all nations must take responsibility to open their markets. We still have many issues to work out. We are making significant progress. When President Clinton travels to Japan next week, he will be able to discuss trade issues frankly but amiably, because we are enjoying a trading relationship that is stronger and more even today than it has been for years. The real goal of the auto agreement is to make it easier for U.S. workers and companies to sell their products. Today we have with us someone who's been building autos for 31 years. Jim Hill joined Ford in 1965 as a foreman at Ford's Michigan truck plant. He has worked in 8 Ford assembly plants and was appointed plant manager in Atlanta last October. 5 months ago, Jim's plant started producing right-hand drive Tauruses specifically designed to sell in Japan. We appreciate you coming here today, Jim. We also appreciate you bringing that beautiful Taurus outside. And I'm pleased to present to all of you today, Jim Hill.
Thank you, Ambassador Cantor. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm fortunate to be part of the revolution of making outstanding American cars, selling them at affordable prices, and selling them in the home market of Japan. Yes, that's correct. We are now selling America's #1 car, the Ford Taurus with right-hand drive, to Japanese customers. Being here today is quite an honor for a kid that grew up in a small coal mining town in Pennsylvania. It's also an honor to represent the Ford Motor Company and the 2,800 men and women on our team back home in Atlanta. Exporting more cars to Japan and other countries is a great opportunity and one that we welcome. It's further proof of the quality of our products and the dedication of our workforce. I've been in the business since 1965. I've participated in the enormous change in our industry, going from a quantity-oriented business to a quality-oriented business. We've learned our lessons well. 8 of the top 10 selling vehicles in North America are produced by Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. And I can't resist telling you that 5 of these top 10 cars are Fords. Our workforce has a goal, the day when our Taurus is in Japan's top 10. Gaining access to the Japanese market has not been easy. For years, we have bumped our heads on Japanese market restrictions. With a level playing field, U.S. vehicles are second to none. President Clinton, Ambassador Cantor, Ambassador Mondale, and many others are working to level the playing field in Japan. At the same time, the American auto workers in Atlanta and other plants around the country are producing top quality vehicles. That's teamwork. The Japanese agreement brings real change for the U.S. auto industry and auto parts producers. It will lead to more exports, more sales, more job opportunities, and greater job security for the American auto worker. For the first time in my memory, we have a president who has supported the auto industry and the automobile worker. In our business, we would call him a car guy, and that's a great compliment. It's with great pride that I present to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, Ambassador Cantor, Senator Levin, and Congressman Levin, all the distinguished leaders from the auto industry, and Mr. J.C. Phillips from the UAW, and to Jim Hill, all the people here from the agencies that are part of our nation's economic team that really worked so hard to achieve these results. I welcome all of you here. I want to thank you for what you said, Jim. I am a car guy. I was 6 years old the first time I crawled underneath a 1952 Buick in my father's tiny dealership in Hope, Arkansas, population 6,000. And I never quite got over it. And one of the things that I promised myself I would do if I ever got a chance to have an impact on it was to give the American automobile industry the chance to be rewarded for its willingness to compete. And that is what we have worked hard to do in this administration. I just saw something, Mickey Cantor and I walked outside along with the Vice President, Mr. Panetta, and I saw something I never thought I'd live to see. And just 4 years ago, if you had told me that I would see it, I'm not sure I would have believed it. Right-hand drive American models made by American workers in American plants, banned for Japan. A Ford Taurus, a GM-built Cavalier, a Chrysler Neon, built for the Japanese market where consumers are now freely buying tens of thousands more American cars than ever before. These new exports, as others have said, are the results of efforts by our car makers and our economic team. We've worked to expand our trade on fair terms, not only with Japan, but with others throughout the world. These exports show what we can do when we truly work together and when others work with us in a spirit of cooperation and mutual benefit. The boost in sales is tremendous news for American workers, for our auto and auto parts manufacturers, for our strong relationship with Japan. I also want to say it is good news for the people of Japan. When I first went to Japan in 1993, I said to the Japanese people what I will have the opportunity to reiterate in just a couple of days. We have no more important bilateral relationship. We are bound together in our support for democracy and freedom and for the security of freedom-loving peoples in Asia and now elsewhere as Japan has shouldered bigger and bigger burdens to help us all pursue the goals that we share. We also know that if we have a free and open trading relationship with them, it will help their economy. It will give their consumers more choices. And it will help both nations to be more competitive as we hurdle our way forward into the 21st century. Just 3 years ago, our ties were strained by a trading relationship not beneficial to our nation. The trade wasn't working, but the ties weren't working either. Today, our relationship is working better for both of us. There's a lot to be done. In a big and complex relationship like ours, there will always be a lot to be done. But we are strengthening and deepening our relationship. It is now a powerful force for creating opportunity, for advancing democracy, and for improving the quality of life in both our countries. I also want to say that, as Ambassador Cantor said earlier, I believe that the right kind of trade is critical for our nation's future. I believe the position of the United States must always be that we favor open trade. We are not afraid to compete. We believe we can win. But if we're going to live in a world where we want others to raise their standard of living to our level, and we no longer control anything like the percentage of the gross national product we did at the end of World War II, then fine, we'll compete and we'll help others to advance. Would we expect the same access to foreign markets that we give foreign producers to ours? It is a simple rule and one we have followed. It is a critical part of our economic strategy. When I became president, job growth was slow, The deficit was exploding more than twice as high as it is now. We did two things. We put in place an economic strategy, lower the deficit, cut it in half in 4 years, get interest rates down, increase investments in education and training, in research and technology, reform and shrink and make more effective the national government, and expand trade on terms both free and fair. That strategy has been implemented by a national economic team. The first time we ever had a fully functioning National Economic Council to parallel our National Security Council to integrate, plan, and implement the economic strategies of this country, and to work in full partnership with the private sector. We now have 8.5 million more jobs than we had just 3 years ago, and I might say of the G7 countries, that's more than 8 million more than the other 6 nations combined. We have the lowest combined rates of unemployment and inflation in 27 years, and trade has been critical to that. As Ambassador Counter said, 200 separate agreements, 20 with Japan alone, now 21. Our exports are at an all-time high. Our auto producers now leading the world. Even more important, we have a framework agreement in our relationship with Japan, which establishes a comprehensive system for dealing with problems that inevitably arise between two great nations. As a result, our exports there are up over 30%. In the areas covered by the agreements, up 85%. Today, exports to Japan support more than 800,000 good-paying American jobs, including 150,000 new ones since 1992. Most of these are good, high-wage jobs because jobs tied to exports on average pay 15% above the national average wage. We are therefore, in expanding our trade to an all-time high, a full third in the last 3 years, slowly helping to change the wage picture that has bedeviled so many American workers who think that they'll work harder and harder and never get a raise. In 1992, 6% of our new jobs were in high-wage industries. In 1995, almost 60% of our new jobs were in high-wage industries. This strategy will work. It is not a miracle. It will not work overnight. It plainly depends for its success primarily on the willingness of American workers and American business leaders to work together to be competitive, to be productive. But it will work. This report shows the difference this approach will make. Now, last year, we reached a landmark agreement that increased our access to the Japanese market for autos and for auto parts. One of the many legacies of our friend Secretary Ron Brown was the establishment with Ambassador Cantor of a team to monitor and enforce the agreement. This report shows that since the agreement was signed, sales of American-made autos have increased by more than a third. Sales of American-made cars, trucks, and vans rose more than 225% between 1992 and 1995, including over 58,000 Big Three cars exported from the U.S. just last year. In the first 2 months of this year, our people sold 1/3 more autos to Japan than in the same period last year. So the movement is all in the right direction. In auto parts, exports over the last 3 years up 60% to $1.6 billion last year. Now, to give you one example of the evidence that this agreement and its faithful implementation and your work has made, Tenneco Automotive of Houston spent 25 years attempting to break into the Japanese market. Now their Monroe shock absorbers will be sold in almost 7,500 Japanese shops. These developments are part of the rebirth of our auto industry, an industry that lost 49,000 jobs in the 4 years before I took office and has gained about 80,000 in the 3 years since. Because of the partnership between labor and management, for the first time in 15 years, last year, the United States auto industry again was #1 in the world. So again, let me thank the representatives of the Big Three the many auto parts producers, and all the workers who have worked so hard to make our belief in this economic strategy a reality. The Big Three will be introducing 17 new right-hand models for the Japanese market in the next 2 years. To those of us who have any memory of this, it seems almost inconceivable. But you always believed you could compete with anybody, anywhere, as long as you had a level playing field. I still believe that. I know we're right, and I know all Americans will be very proud of these results. Let me just say one other thing about the trade issue. I'm happy about the debate in America on trade today, but I sometimes think it falls into two camps which don't reflect the real world. There are people who say, well, America's got a lot of folks who hadn't gotten a raise in a long time. And we may be creating a lot of jobs, but there are people who are losing jobs. Well, that's true. But it's also true everywhere in the world. It is not true that the answer is to put a wall up around America and walk away from our obligations and our opportunities to compete and win. If we did that, we would pay a terrible price. Then there are others who say, well, we ought to be for free trade, but we shouldn't worry so much about all these specific agreements and all these details. We shouldn't have governments negotiating this. We ought to just sort of get out of the way and see what happens and hope for the best. We tried it that way, and it didn't work out very well. Both of those arguments are wrong. Neither reflects an understanding of how the real world works. The right policy is to be for free and fair trade. The right governmental action is to support a genuinely competitive marketplace, help to create it, and then get out of the way. That is the proper policy. If we put up walls, what would happen to the jobs of the people who make cars in plants like the Chrysler plant in Belvidere, Illinois, or Ford's in Atlanta, or Chevrolet's in Lorain, Ohio, to produce those right-hand drive vehicles we just saw? On the other hand, if we didn't want to hold others to the same standards we expect to meet in world competition, what would happen to all the jobs of the people who would not be able to stand against the kinds of unfair practices we have seen practiced in the past? We made a good start in the auto industry. The Japanese have proceeded in good faith. I think it's been good for them as well as us. I hope that we will see the day when these policies will be the law of the world, when the World Trade Organization, because of GATT, really will have an integrated world trading system. I hope we will see the day when we will see these kind of benefits in dealing with all of Asia, all of Latin America, all of Europe, all of Africa, all of the countries that were formerly part of the communist bloc. But I know this: these people in the auto industry have proved that our policy works. I thank you, Senator Levin and Congressman Levin, for your work. I want to thank all the people in our administration and the economic team. And most of all, I want to thank the workers and the managers in the auto industry for proving that we're doing the right thing. Now, before I close, let me just make one more announcement. We could not have done what we did here if we hadn't had a vision not only of the economic policy we wanted to pursue, but also of how we wanted to pursue it. We put together an economic team for the first time in the history of this government that really functions. I can't imagine why it had never been done before, but it hadn't. There were a lot of different power centers in the federal government allegedly making economic policy. We decided to change that. We had a good strategy, good teamwork, and good players. We didn't have a better player than the late Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown. Nobody was more determined that American workers and companies would get a fair shake around the world. And his extraordinary efforts are a model for us all. He memorized, as I said at his memorial service the other day, he made every Department of Commerce employee memorize a one-sentence mission statement that ought to be the mission of everybody in our government. Our mission is to ensure economic opportunity for every American. Well, we still have to do that, and I don't want to miss a beat. And I am determined that we will continue on the work that Ron Brown was engaged in to the last day of his life. So today I am proud to announce that I intend to appoint Ambassador Mickey Cantor to be the next Secretary of Commerce. And I will send his nomination to the Senate promptly. This is not an easy time for the people at the Commerce Department, but they will do fine. And I think that we need to send a clear signal to the rest of America and to the world that we don't intend to miss a beat. We've got a strategy, we've got a team, it's working, and we're going forward with it. No trade representative has ever amassed a record of achievement that surpasses Mickey Cantor's in the last 3.5 years. GATT, NAFTA, 200 separate agreements, enforcement, the consequences that flowed from it. But frankly, it hadn't been easy. If you think that you've been in something tough, you ought to sit in those trade negotiations day in and day out, and then when you finish one, be told to get on an airplane and fly halfway around the world and get in the middle of another one. I've heard Mickey say 1,000 times he was 6'4" and blonde-headed when he came to work here. He and Ron Brown used to joke, you know, that they were the Alphonse and Gaston of our economic team. Mickey was the bad cop, Ron was the good cop. I thought we ought to give him a chance to be a good cop for a change. And I want to thank him for his service. I also want to announce that I will ask his principal deputy, Charlene Barshevsky, who has been a brilliant negotiator for our country, to serve as acting U.S. Trade Representative. She's been a deputy there since I took office. She's been our chief trade negotiator in Latin America and in Asia. She's not here today because she's on her way back from a trade mission. And I have gone to many places and had world leaders ask me who she was because they virtually got tears in their eyes after 4 or 5 hours of trying to outmaneuver her. So I want to thank her in her absence. Finally, I want to make one more announcement. In just a few days, we will have another very important vacancy in our economic team, one that has been critical to the success of our plans, to being able to cut the deficit in half and continue to invest in America's priorities. And that's the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. I've been very blessed to have 2 outstanding directors, and I gave them both other jobs. Leon Panetta is now serving with great distinction as the White House Chief of Staff and longs for the days when he used to have that other job. Alice Rivlin will soon be moving on to become the Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve Board, and therefore the object of our complaints whenever the economy is not growing as we think it should. And so there is, or soon will be, a vacancy at the Office of Management and Budget. And I am pleased to announce today that I intend to nominate as the next director Franklin D. Raines. Frank Raines has had extensive experience in government and in the private sector. He worked at OMB and on the domestic policy staff under President Carter. Since 1991, he has served in the very important position of Vice Chair of the Federal National Mortgage Association, Fannie Mae. He knows the world of finance. He respects the bottom line. He also understands, I know from our work in the transition and from a conversation we had just yesterday, the very real human impact the work of the budget has on the American people and the opportunities they will or will not have to make the most of their own lives. So I'm very proud to ask him to join our team. I frankly was a little surprised that he was willing to leave that incredibly lucrative position, how shall I say it? So I told Frank when he came here that he was about to join the ranks of Bob Rubin and Mickey Cantor and a number of other successful people who came into this administration to help save the middle class, and when they leave, they'll be part of it. As you might imagine, this has been a profoundly moving and difficult week for all of us in our political family. Mickey Cantor and I were particularly close to Ron Brown. We loved him very much. I am doing what I think is the right thing to do today for the economic interests of America's business and for the future of all those workers who deserve the opportunity that is set out in the Commerce Department's mission statement. I've known Mickey Counter a very long time. Except for the color of their skins, the career that he and Ron Brown had remarkably parallel over a long period of time. And if he does as well at Commerce as he did at the Trade Office, we are in very good hands indeed. I also want to thank Frank Raines for proving once again that this country is full of patriotic Americans who love their country, who are willing to serve, and who are willing to make real, tangible sacrifices to serve, because the work of democracy, the work of citizenship, is what makes the rest of this country move and go. I thank them both, and I'd like to ask if each in their turn they'd like to come up and just make a few remarks. First, Mickey Cantor.
Mr. President, you honor me with your confidence, and you honor me with your friendship for so many years. Mr. Vice President, thank you for the same. I couldn't have two better friends in the world, and I appreciate it very, very much. I have three, with all due respect, you a little more important people off to my right. Almost everyone gets off to my right once in a while. My wife, Heidi Schulman, my son, Doug, who's a graduating senior at Yale Law School, and his wife, Allison. Thank you for being here. Love you. I talked to Alma Brown just about an hour ago, and she was gracious enough and loving enough to say that Ron would have loved this moment, to see me standing here. We stood shoulder to shoulder to make sure we grew jobs and raised standards of living and did what the President said, and that is provide economic opportunity for every American. It's what we did before we came here, is what we did when we came here. And I will continue that legacy. That is my pledge. That is my goal. That is what I'm going to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. President and Mr. Vice President, I'd like to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, an opportunity to serve our country at a very important time. It's something that I was taught throughout my life to be something important. You don't grow up with the initials FDR without having some appreciation of the role of, and the positive role that government can play in the lives of people throughout this nation and throughout the world. I'm very happy that in the nick of time, some people very important to me were able to be here. My wife Wendy, daughter Laura, Andrea, and Sarah. I'll have to explain to them later exactly what's going on here. But it's a great honor for me to have the opportunity to assist the President and the Vice President in carrying out the very important work that they have been carrying for the last 3 years, and that is to establish a fiscal policy that makes sense for this country and for the world. I think we're at a historic moment. I did serve in the budget office previously, and in those times we would invent exactly what our targets were in terms of what we're trying to do in setting up a budget. And you could always resolve the problem by compromising by saying, well, let's just add another $10 or $20 billion and say that we've reached an agreement. But that's not a fiscal policy. A fiscal policy has to be tied to what you want to achieve in the economy. But more importantly, we're at a time when we can match a fiscal policy with an expression of the values of the country. And I think the important debate that's going on now is one that we'll all look back on as being historic. And that is, can a country this large and this complicated, with a budget as big as the budget we have is, not just talk about line items and talk about interest groups, but say, how does this match up with what we as a nation are trying to achieve? Mr. President, as you know, there's a big debate going on about growth and the potential for growth. We all know that if we can get a little more growth in the economy, we can solve a lot of our problems. But the economists are debating how fast can the economy grow. But that argument is a little sterile because it always assumes that you're just going to leave the economy as you find it, and you're not going to try to change anything. Well, business leaders know they don't just take the company as they find it and see, well, what's the best I can do if I don't change anything? You change the inputs, you change the throughputs. And part of this values discussion that the President has led has been one that says, let's do something about education. Let's do something about training. Let's improve productivity so we can have more growth, more wealth, more ability to improve the living standards of people throughout the nation. And that's what I view the charge of this job to be, to help the President carry out that mandate, which is to make this economy more vibrant, not by wishing, not by hoping, but by doing, by changing the ability of American workers to create wealth that they can share in so that people throughout the nation will see a higher standard of living. So, Mr. President, I look forward to this opportunity. I don't look forward to telling my colleagues at Fannie Mae that I won't be with them any longer because we've had a wonderful experience there in the largest company in the country, one that's serving a public purpose, expanding home ownership. But this task is one that I hope I can have a significant effect on, that I can be an assistant to you as well as to assist members of Congress in coming together on a broad agreement that will provide the economic basis for continuing one of the longest expansions in history and to turn it into the longest expansion in history with the greatest increase in well-being for the average American. Thank you.